Hey, this is DJ from DJsTrains on YouTube. For those who don't know me yet, I've been an engineer for CSX Railroad since 1999. I've driven trains through Pennsylvania, Ohio, Maryland, and West Virginia, close to 1,000 miles of territory. My job has allowed me a unique perspective and knowledge of the railroad, and I'd like to share some of that with you. Whether you are a model railroader who wants to model more prototypically, a rail fan who just enjoys seeing these amazing machines in action, or a young man or woman who has a dream of doing what I've been doing for all these years. I'll try to touch upon all three groups with this presentation. So the first question I'm usually asked is, how did you get this job? I grew up loving trains just like all of you. I had an HO scale layout in my garage as a teenager, which looking back at the stuff I did kind of makes me cringe now, like the time where I used powdered limestone fertilizer to make snow, and my mom called the Poison Control Center for help on how to remove this toxic material from the house. I grew up pre-internet, so I had no idea how the railroads worked or what a yard was for. I thought yards were for parking trains and storage. Spoiler alert, they're not. I was a disc jockey throughout my 20s and didn't think of being an engineer until late 1998 when I was winding down the DJ career and I couldn't find work anywhere and I was a month from being homeless. That's when my girlfriend at the time saw the ad that CSX was hiring. Turns out they didn't hire since the 1980s and the majority of the guys were retiring soon. And CSX and Norfolk Southern were on the verge of buying Conrail and they expected growth. So after passing the background test, I packed my bags for 4 weeks at a training center in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Back then the school was $4,000. Plus, you had to pay your own lodging. They did pay for our flight and stay in Atlanta for a week of field training. But now things are different. Most railroads train you on the job, or at least you don't have to pay for your schooling. They want to train you their way. So there's nothing that you should try to do now or classes to take or anything to impress them. The truth is, they want an open mind or a blank slate so that they can so they can train you their way. You will start out as a conductor. The conductor's job is primarily the paperwork, physically lining tracks for our movement, connecting the cars, inspecting the car's brake system, and they're considered in charge of the train, but they usually make slightly less money. The engineers are responsible for driving the train, which takes about another 4 weeks of school, another half year of on-the-job training. But we do get the best seat in the house, and we stay warm and dry. And let's face it, chicks dig engineers. We both work under the authority of a train dispatcher who controls the main lines, and the yard master who controls the yards. We can only work up to 12 hours and are usually on call 24 hours a day, 6 days a week, and we stay in a hotel a lot. It's a tough lifestyle. It is not for everyone. The pay is good, not as great as it used to be, but I get to drive a train and wave to people. So we have 3 different kinds of trains. The road train, which goes from, we'll just say, city to city, the long runs. The local, which services the local industries. And the yard job, who mostly organize cars for the locals and the road trains. Now they each have their pros and cons, so I like to switch it up throughout the year. But all crews start their day at the yard office. This is where road train crews change out, where we get our paperwork, our supplies, and our instructions. They could be old passenger stations or switch towers or trailers or even modern buildings, but you need to model them. So let's look at the power for each job. Today, we use 4-axle engines like GP40s for both the yard and locals. These engines have been around since the 1970s, but they are the best for their job. They move quick, stop quick, and can handle the tight curves. The road trains now are mostly the newer engines, those GEVOs, which are just absolute beasts for pulling. They are way more comfortable and they have the newest control features and safety features. They are meant for slowly starting like a 3-mile long, 23,000 ton train. So they're not going to be used for switching in the yards or switching small customers. They have features like PTC, which is positive train control, which is a computer screen that shows us the signals and the speed of the track ahead and if there's guys working on the tracks. There's features like Trip Optimizer, which is basically autopilot, which the company thinks saves us fuel by the computer's decision to use as little horsepower as possible just to keep the train moving. And DP, which is distributed power, and that allows a similar engine to be operated by remote control either in the middle of the train or the rear of the train without the need for another engineer and conductor. So with all this information, it can help you decide what kind of engines do you want for your layout. So let's talk about layouts. The questions I pose to you is where and when is your layout? This is very important because once you can clearly state the time period of your layout, it'll help you determine what you should buy and what you should leave on the shelf. Now, too often I see modelers buy what's available at the hobby store and then try to put it on plywood and expect it to always make them happy. Well, my experience has shown that when I build a new layout, it gives me more motivation and enthusiasm if I choose a favorite area to model and a time period. And if there isn't a similar model available, then I'll scratch build it myself. Now, if you go to my YouTube channel, DJsTrains, and search the playlist called Scratch Building, you'll see that it's a lot easier and cheaper than what you may think. Once you start creating exactly what you want instead of buying any available kits, it becomes very addicting, and you'll be able to recreate the house you grew up in or the industries that your favorite railroad serves. Now let's talk about track plans. If this isn't the part that causes more stress in the model railroading field, then I don't know what is. There are so many books and websites, but let's be honest, most of it just looks like a bowl of spaghetti. The best way to design a railroad is to think like a railroad. How can I get from customer to customer with the least amount of track? Now, a straight line is the fastest way, but with the Earth's terrain being uneven, I may need to curve it to go around a hill or to find the flattest path. And that flattest path is usually parallel to a river. Since river travel in America came before the railroads, it was the smartest transition to keep them as close as possible. Now, nearly 1,000 of the miles of rail travels that I've had have been within a short distance of the river. Now, they're easy to model when you start your layout with a foam base on top of the plywood. Now, think about the fact that water will always flow downward, and if your layout is on plywood with nowhere to go, then just think about this. The first rain and your railroad's going to flood. So start every layout with foam and then carve away for culverts and drainage. And here's something you may not know. Anytime there is a drainage pipe under the tracks, railroads will paint the tie above it white so that the maintenance crews don't accidentally damage it when they're replacing ties. Now, getting back to track plans, think like the railroads. They prefer that their customer be as close to their main line as possible so that they can simply install a switch and run a short, usually parallel track to the industry. So when I see a long spur in the middle of a layout, I think the railroad would not like that. It's going to take longer to get to that customer, and there's more track to maintain. Time and money. Time and money. That is what they are trying to save, and you should too. So do you really need double track? That depends. Are you modeling a specific time period and a railroad that needed double track to handle all that rail traffic? If you are freelancing and only running one train at a time, you can get away with single track with a passing siding if necessary. With today's signal system, it is more common to see railroads downsize to a single track and run bigger trains and less of them than to run twice as many smaller trains. So what customers do your railroads serve? The primary customers where I work are in the drywall, chemical, glass, and steel-related industries. So if I was modeling that, I wouldn't just go buy livestock cars or grain cars or passenger cars. Same thing if I'm modeling my area. I wouldn't buy a grain silo or a coal tipple or a modern passenger station. Narrowing your focus allows you to focus, and that leads to progress. But no matter how small your layout is, you need to model an interchange with another railroad. An interchange is simply a track or two where one railroad sets off cars for another and vice versa. It doesn't have to be elaborate. Every industry needs another, and the other may be further away than what you can model. A short line railroad may serve a lumber yard, but that lumber may come from a sawmill 1,000 miles away. So as an engineer, I get asked a lot of questions, and recently through my DJsTrains Facebook page and Twitter page, I asked for some questions for me to answer. First question was, would you consider PSR, which is Precision Scheduled Railroading, a realistic long-term business strategy? Or do you think it's just a quick cash grab scheme like it seems on the surface? PSR, created by the late Hunter Harrison, my personal experience with PSR has been a nightmare. On day one with the implementation of it at CSX, they fired 1,000 good-paying management employees. That led to a who's in charge confusion that took a long time to straighten out. Then came the closing of the hump yards, the downsizing of the terminals, cutting a huge portion of the workforce from mechanical to transportation and more. It was awful. They cut our van drivers who took us to our trains and made management do it. They sold off branch lines, discontinued routes, increased train size, and put hundreds of engines in storage, all to raise the stock price. We're gradually getting away from it since he died a few months into his tenure with CSX, but we'll never recover. Greed has no end. Next question is, what do engineers think about being photographed and videotaped all the time? Now, personally, I have no problem with it, and I'm the one who waves and honks the most. Truthfully, 99% of Railfans are respectful. 99%. Next question is, how long does an engine have to idle before it's considered warmed up and ready to pull freight? That's a good question. On some engines, we'll get a warning that says load limited, cold engine. And it usually stays on for about 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes at the most. One of our rules is that locomotives cannot be shut down when the temperatures fall below 28 degrees, but most engines have a feature that prevents cold weather shutdowns. If you could work for a fallen flag, what would it be and why? I like this question. I say a steel mill short line in my area during the 1970s because there was just so much like really neat engines and equipment, and the buildings and the blast furnaces were just awe-inspiring. Next question is, if you're at a red signal for a while, what are you doing in the cab until you get a green signal? Well, since they started this precision scheduled railroading, they removed the rule that allowed us to take 45-minute long naps. One would have to stay awake while the other one could nap for 45 minutes. They took that rule out, so we're not allowed to sleep at all. They put inward-facing cameras, and they will fire you if they catch you sleeping. So honestly, we're bored out of our minds. We're not allowed to use our cell phones, and there are cell phone detectors in most engines. So I bring a notebook and just plan my to-do list for the day or for the week or for my YouTube videos. Next question is, what is the best way to describe how the different weights of a train, like the loads, the type, the lengths, how it affects operation? And he added on, like, what is the easiest, the most enjoyable versus the most intense and difficult type of loads to operate? Now, the worst train to operate is just engines by themselves. Honestly, you spend the entire time just staring at your speedometer. Now, keep in mind, even 1 mile per hour over the speed limit is considered speeding. So it's very easy for the engines to pick up speed when going downhill, because like if you have a long train, that train could be held back by curves or the rear of the train going up a hill. So you have more control actually with a longer train. Now, a short, heavy train is also very scary. Like a loaded grain train, stone, iron ore, something like that, usually are about 3 times as heavy as they are long. And that ratio, my friend, is like trying to catch a bowling ball as opposed to catching a beach ball. Also, the 3-mile long autoracks or intermodal trains, those are sometimes rough because the slack action will hold you back on a curve. And imagine you're going straight and then the train hits a curve. The tension starts to build as you're going through the curves, and it'll hold back the rear of the train, and it kind of pulls you back into your seat. I mean, you almost feel like if you're running and someone grabs you by the back of your belt buckle, belt loop or whatever, and just pulls on you, how your feet kind of go out. That's how it feels with a long train in a curve. Now, last is a train that's built wrong. Now, when I say it's built wrong, that's when you put the loads of the train, or loads at the rear of the train, where they should be at as close to the head end when practical. This is where you get what's known as a run-in, and that's when if you're slowing down the train from like the head end with dynamic braking, but at the same time all the weight is on the rear of the train, that starts coming at you, and that actually can pop off a light car, like an empty car in the middle of your train on a curve. So you have to keep physics in mind. So trains that are built wrong, I mean, you can get that run-in. It pushes you pretty hard. So keep all that in mind with physics, because engineers, we don't break a sweat. It's not a physical hard job, but it is very mentally taxing, and it's a job I'm proud to say that I do, and I do very well, and I hope to share more information in future videos. So in conclusion, I hope everyone got something out of this. From the modelers who learn to observe real life and how the earth is not flat, and therefore your layout should start on foam and then just create the contours by cutting away. Just observe nature. Take pictures, because your eyes can fool you too. When you think trees are brown and then you find out that they're gray, it's little things like that. The water really isn't as green as you think. So take pictures of areas that you want to model and then just try to recreate some stuff. Don't know what to do? Model what you grew up watching as a kid. Learn to scratch build. Take your time, and you're not in competition with anybody but yourself. for the people that want to become an engineer. I hope I answered a lot of those questions about my story, where you may fit in with being a conductor or an engineer, if that is a path you want to pursue. And then some of my experiences. Hope you enjoy some of that, from the engines that we run to our work schedule. And then lastly, for the rail fans, love you guys. Honestly, I mean, that was me as a kid. I don't Railfan CSX. I'll videotape it for you guys, but I don't Railfan it. So I just I like to be able to contribute to the hobby, and that's why I have the YouTube channel DJsTrains, also the website DJsTrains.com, and also on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And I just hope to share all my information worldwide, because I know people all around the world love American trains, and this is my story, and I appreciate your time. So thank you guys.